Good job. Welcome back. Very good to see you all back from coffee. Do move forward to the front so that people who arrive late will have chairs to sit on at the back. Or if you see them looking for a seat, tell them that there are a few spaces near the front. Okay, so now we are going to hear first of all from representatives from Poland and then from the Austrian team. So first of all, Jacek Moskalewicz, I pronounced it wrong, do tell me.
I appreciate your efforts.
Yes, but he is a very distinguished representative from the Institute of Psychiatry and Neurology in Warsaw, so we're very glad that you've come all this way. And he is the co-author of over 250 publications, which is extremely impressive. He is also a member of the WHO Experts Advisory Panel on Alcohol and Drugs, so he does play a key role in linking research into the policy and practice. So he's now going to talk about the legal and regulatory context on behalf of the Polish team.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction.
Microphone.
Thank you very much for this introduction. We are from the Institute of Psychiatry and Neurology, but I hope we do not disappoint you because we are not psychiatrists, we are not neurologists. Actually, the background of all of you is social research. Agnieszka is psychologist, Kasia is political scientist or sociologist as well, and I am sociologist, the background sociology. I would like to acknowledge contribution not only of the Polish team, but also of all partners from all countries. As a matter of fact, almost everybody from all partner countries contributed to the paper, which constitutes a base for this presentation. So let's watch. So a slide about background. As everybody knows, the legal framework of drug policies in all countries all over the world is regulated by United Nations Drug Conventions from 1961, 71, and 88 that criminalized a number of psychoactive substances, and selection of these substances was quite arbitrary. All these conventions give priority to supply reduction, even though the convention, Vienna Conventions from 1988, made some efforts to balance supply reduction and demand reduction. So all signatories of these conventions had to apply illegal status on selected psychoactive substances. But criminalization of possession left for discretion of individual countries. So global, but also in EPPIC partners countries, there is quite a variation in level of criminalization and enforcement across Europe and EPPIC countries. And we have interesting experience from Denmark and Poland, both depenalized possession of drugs in relatively recent times. And this is a lesson from Poland. This graph represents a number of drug offenses registered by the police, and these light blue bars represent crimes or offenses of drug possession. So you can see since the late 1990s and in particular in 2000s, the number of drug offenses, drug crimes increased dramatically from several thousand in the beginning of the 1990s to about 70,000 in 2005. And then after a short decline, you had a growth again to 75, 80,000 in 2012. And as I said, the share of crimes or offenses of drug possession is substantial, reaching about half of all possessions. In contrast, the crimes related to production, import, export, or cultivation is on the same level since the very beginning. So the major production of criminality is the law that criminalized or penalized drug possession. Actually, in 1997, we introduced first time this penalization of drug possession, but 3 years later, it was made even more restrictive. So every possession, no matter whether it is for personal use, whether it is small amounts, everything was criminalized. And it really gave impetus to the growing wave of crimes, at least at the level of criminal statistics. And we have Denmark, which criminalized or penalized drug possession in 2003, and it is almost carbon copy of the trends in Poland. First, quite impressive growth, then small decline and growth again. And as it is shown on this slide, in particular, in recent years, almost half of the people who were sentenced or caught due to drug possession are people in the age of 15, 24. So, in fact, the aim of this presentation is to show that this focus, preoccupation with reduction of drug supply has some positive consequences, but all in all had a lot of unintended negative consequences. And to analyze these unintended consequences, it is an old concept elaborated already by Merton in the 1930s, but then developed by Patrick Barrett on unintended consequences of purposive human action. And Patrick Barrett elaborated the typology, making distinction between individual consequences and social consequences. Among individual consequences, you have immediate health, financial, and traumatic consequences with contacts with criminal justice system. In social consequences, you have systemic consequences which affect social relationships like stigmatization, but also institutions that are established to deal or to work to manage drug problems. But according to the typology, there are also aggregate consequences, but fortunately they do not exist across every country, but aggregate consequences are consequences which affect the whole social system, like consequences of American prohibition, alcohol prohibition in the 1920s and beginning of the 1930s, or anti-alcohol crusade by Gorbachev, which contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Currently, in more contemporary times, we have Mexico, whose whole political and social system is affected by wars on drugs, actually waged by the United States, which is also the biggest consumer and which represent great demand for drugs that are produced in South America. So let us start from individual immediate health consequences. So it's quite obvious, but it worthwhile mentioning a risk of overdose because illicit substances are not controlled as regard the content and quality. So unlike Sara, I will read this quotation not pretending that I read it better than you do, but to give you time to read it. So now I use LPS very sporadically, very rarely, have very bad memories. Thank you, not for me. This is simply stupid. It is not known what the side effects are because it is not investigated in any way. And it was reported from Poland by 24-year-old man. But we have similar quote from the UK by 17-year-old girl who said, I got a scare when I had to have my heart monitored after using drugs of unknown origin. Thought I was going to end up having a heart attack. So, especially traumatic are individual immediate consequences of being in touch with criminal justice system. Contacts of young drug consumers are, as I said, humiliating. Then we went to another police station reported by a 15-year-old girl from Poland, where we were searched. Well, we had to strip naked, we had to undress, then we came back again. We waited until 8 p.m. for parents. So eventually this story had, let us say, optimistic end, happy end, but they spent like 7 hours at the police station, forced to get naked and being searched in a very humiliating way. But similar experience comes from Denmark. They, police, kept beating me because I was so affected by drugs that I didn't react on the pain of the beating. So, lying with my face against the asphalt, they kept beating me because I called them all these bad things. And then they claimed that I attacked them, you know. That's why, that's what they write in my papers anyway. I don't know who was this, because due to some particular Danish regulations, the anonymity of these people is covered even more than the remaining countries. So financial consequences are quite obvious. If I think about how much money I waste to get this shit, and then it is Polish prisoner, Italian prisoner, this is really shit, it's not cocaine. How much there can be? 3%? Because the rest is all methamphetamine, all cards on arm and cut. Sometimes I happen to smoke some pieces and just started to sweat cold as if it were cut with heroin, because they give shitty stuff and you risk dying. So you have combination of financial consequences, but also complaints about individual immediate health consequences, which might be immediate but sometimes quite dreadful. And it was what Franca and Sara were talking about, individual prolonged consequences that affect life trajectories of young people. If I go out and do not have my parents to help me, and I do not have the chance to work, I think I'm going to deal again. It is a quotation from Italy. As far as I remember, it was a young migrant from other country. So it's like a vicious circle. That prison does not help, the opposite is true. So systemic consequences affecting social relationships. Young people quite early in their lives are exposed to criminal subcultures, and some of them reject these, but many of them adopt it and being a part of the subculture. This is a quotation from Denmark, where somebody, in fact, was very critical of this criminal subculture. Being sent to prison when I was 18 has fucked up a lot of things for me. It did not help to place me together with other people who were sentenced for manslaughter and things like that. It did not help. I don't think it is helpful for any young 18 years old. But of course, it also produces stigmatization. This illicit criminal status of drugs. It is hard when you leave the prison. You saw this quotation today from, I believe, Betsy, but perhaps I will repeat it. Because even the people who know you, my Italian friends, looked at me differently. Didn't trust me, because in the end, prison remains a place for criminals. But also, this illegal, illicit status, criminal status of drugs affect functioning of the institutions that are apparently established to manage in a pragmatic way the problem. So in closed institutions, in secured places, priority is given, thank you very much, managing 5 minutes. Priority is given to security and to drugs. So here is a quotation from 16-year-old girl in forensic psychiatry institution in Poland. I have no leave of absence, that I miss my family a lot. I miss what a normal human needs. And she spent like 18 months without any contact with her family, because there is one forensic psychiatry hospital for young people in Poland, and sometimes parents live like 500 kilometers away. And the staff is not very enthusiastic to invite and to welcome parents in these places. And involuntary participation in different treatment and preventive initiatives may also have unintended side effects. In fact, in different countries, these interventions have different status. In some of them it is compulsory, in some of them it is voluntary. But young people perceive it as a kind of blackmailing, that either you go to prison or undergo criminal procedures, or you go to treatment or to community intervention. So they are just doing it to get rid of the risk of criminal procedures. They will be kidding about this intervention. They participate just to get a paper and bring to the police, as one girl did, or to the court, as one boy did. They were laughing openly in the room where the intervention was given. It doesn't mean that every one of them did, but you have this kind of participant of this community-based intervention. And since a drug problem is considered by the law, by the legislation, not only the health problem or social problem, but criminal problem, the focus of many interventions is just on drugs. And other problems are neglected. And what Betsy said this morning, in all countries, these young people have a complex set of problems. So if you focus on drugs, it is not helpful, and perhaps it is not their priority to get rid of drugs, but they would like other problems to be helped. So another quotation from Poland, man 24 years old. As for the weaknesses of the program, there is no psychiatric background. My psychiatrist recommended me first to use addiction therapy, and then I had to deal with depression, because the effects of depression with marijuana smoking overlap. I would rather deal with both matters at the same time. And he was in the program exclusively focused on marijuana use. So only institutions established to deal with the problem, if they have to deal with young people in contact with criminal justice system, they practically do not offer that much of harm and risk reduction approaches. Again, Polish quotation, I think that the approach of the majority of therapists in Poland is that if you do not abstain, you do not improve. That is totally untrue, as I reduce only my use and I make great progress in my life. And quite often, and it's a question of transferability, treatment approaches which work relatively well with people who are not deprived of freedom do not work well and are not adequate in closed, secured institutions. It seems to me that this therapy is not at all adapted to the conditions of the prison. It is based on the principle of free therapy, when we are free, we have a choice, we can change something. Here we are closed in, and they require things from us that we cannot achieve. This is reflection of 19 years old prisoner from, female prisoner from Poland. So, I can stop.
No, you can say 2 words.
Okay. I think at the end of the paper we produced, I wrote that it's not yet another call for legalization of drugs, because not only because we see not necessarily positive consequences of legalization and marketization of drugs in some American states, but it is also kind of pragmatic thing, that in all countries you have these problems with higher or lower intensity, but in many countries you can find ways to evade it, to pass by these barriers that are produced by the legal framework, and to offer more complex, more holistic help. And what is important, and it's the last experience from Poland, it's not only that you have legal framework that promotes diversion from criminal justice system to social welfare or health institutions, public health institutions. It's also the question of prevailing attitudes. Almost 10 years ago, Poland introduced quite good legal framework to divert young people from criminal justice procedures towards treatment. But if you look at the map, how often these diversion are applied in different regions. You have regions that 60% of all young people are diverted to health and social welfare systems, but you have some where no one is diverted. So, and you can guess that these are more conservative, more traditional regions where people think that penalty is more important, that drug taking is immoral. So it's not only a question of changing legal frame, it's also a question of changing attitudes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. We'll hear from the next speaker, and then we'll have a time for another discussion. Just one thing I've been asked to say. Those of you who've been trying to access the internet and found it difficult is because Middlesex Open is actually Middlesex Closed at the moment, but people are working on it, and by the afternoon, hopefully, it will be possible to access the internet.
Thank you.
So now we have Günter Stummvoll from Vienna. He is at the European Centre for Social Welfare Policy and Research there, and also at the University of Vienna in Austria. And he is going to talk about the social and cultural context. So this session is about the context within which these trajectories are observed. So we have the legal and regulatory context, and now the socio-cultural context.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Hello, everybody. For this presentation, I've prepared a text, but I will read it as slowly as possible so that everyone can clearly understand. So before I speak about the notion of culture, let me say a word about our scientific methodology and the context of our research. We have interviewed young people in our target group in different contexts. In inpatient communal living, in prisons, and during outpatient therapy, mostly in psychotherapy and social counseling. We have then described the trajectories and the situations of young people who are taking part in various programs and activities. And these thick descriptions have been our empirical data. They make a set of statements that directly refer to the external empirical world we have investigated. Now we all know that empirical facts cannot speak for themselves. They require a broader conceptual, theoretical context to shape the meaning and the significance. We could interpret our data in an endless variety of ways, but now I want to narrow it down And I want to use a frame of reference, and the frame of reference should be the notion of culture. What I want to do today is introduce to you three different notions of culture. I want to suggest that there are three notions of culture that can be retrieved from our data, from our interviews with the young people. And I will take three examples from our sample and pinpoint these three aspects of culture in regards to the young drug users in the criminal justice system. And the three notions of culture are migration, ethnicity, and what I want to call subcultures of edge workers. And I will explain in a minute what I mean by that. Now let's turn to the first case that I want to present. The first person I want to present was a young man of 24 years old when we met him in an inpatient care home for drug treatment in Austria, where he could stay for 6 months as a resident, and subsequently he had a chance to daily ambulant treatment. In 2014 he left from Algeria and went to Spain, where he lived for 6 weeks, and then he moved on to France, and from France he was brought with a friend to Vienna, to Austria. He wanted to work as a hairdresser like his friend, but without a work permit he could of course not find an official job. He did not see another way of making money, he said, than selling drugs. When he got caught with drugs, he was sentenced to prison for 4 months. After his release, he lived in an asylum seekers home for 4 weeks, and then he was moved to another asylum seekers home in another town in Austria, where he lived for 7 months. Finally, his application for asylum was denied because Algeria is not considered a country at war. So then he lived quietly underground together with friends from Syria. With all this moving around and hiding from authorities, he said in the interview, he became very stressed with paranoia and very tired and depressed at the same time. His drugs, marijuana and cocaine, helped him forget his trauma about the time in Algeria, about his travels, and all his current troubles that he was facing at the time. This young man stands for many persons in this situation in Europe today. They take drugs as self-medication. With not much to lose, they get pulled into a vicious circle of living illegally in a country hiding from authorities. They live in the dark and they are dependent on help from friends. More often than not, the drug market seems to be their only economic basis for survival. So hence, culture in this context means a long series of individual experiences in life that continue to have an impact on the current circumstances of a person. Individual stress and strain linger into the present like a huge backpack of burden. Refugees become underground drug users in a retreatist subculture and are particularly difficult to reach. This has to be considered also in drug treatment and drug prevention programs. So that was the first case. Let's look at the second person. The second person was 18 years old when we interviewed him in the Austrian youth prison. I remember his very funny accent because it was a mix of Turkish and Austrian Tyrolean dialect. He lived in Innsbruck for most of his life, that's where he grew up. But he came when he was a very little kid, at 3 years old. He came from Turkey to Austria with his mother, and he lived there with a younger sister, but his father was absent all his life. He was convicted several times for assault and robbery, which, interestingly, he explained in the interview with his cultural tradition. He said, "In my culture they say, when your father is away, you must be the man in the house." And I was only 10 years old. He was continuously insulted at school as the boy without a daddy. That was when he struggled and started, as he said, to defend himself. He became aggressive at school and he became a violent criminal out in the streets. He never got caught with drugs though. He was very, very proud of that in the interview. The young man argued with his cultural background as a reason for the way his life developed. The term culture is used as an ethnic framework for an acquired habitus, a set of particular habits in behavior acquired through socialization in a particular social environment. A habitus is the product of social structures which limit but also determine a range of social practices. Culture is an entity of expressions of rituals and social practices in everyday life. Culture is expressed through symbols, ideas, and also material goods. According to Pierre Bourdieu, the term habitus is means a product of class differences, which again reproduce specific social practices in a social field. Bourdieu argues the social position in a society is determined not only by the economic deprivation, but also by cultural capital and respective daily practices. In that sense, the young man has named just one example for his understanding of culture to express his motives for delinquency. And he said, "I became violent because I had to be a man when I was just really a little boy." Now, the social role of the man in the house is significant for patriarchal systems. The social role is embedded in a normative structure of social institutions such as the family and religion. The norms in this culture are so powerful that the consequences of deviance in this culture are more severe than the consequences of deviance in the overall general society. Every individual is subject to normative role expectations. We may say he or she has internalized these role expectations. This young man suffered an intra-role conflict to fulfill high economic demands, high economic pressure in the family, and this economic pressure also converged with moral pressure or ethnic or cultural pressures. This particular understanding of a culture clash and its consequences seem to be of vital importance in drug therapies. I turn to the third person and the third notion of culture. And I want to reflect a little bit on that term of subculture. And I think this may be, for us, for our discussion afterwards, maybe the most important or most interesting person. This person was 21 years old, and he was taking an outpatient drug prevention program with an association authorized by the Austrian Federal Ministry of Justice. He was interviewed in a park in Vienna. That was his favorite spot that he showed me, where he used to sell drugs. The psychotherapy was offered to him after serving his time in prison. He reported about his life as a member of a deviant subculture, where drugs were simply part of everyday life and inevitably connected with delinquency. His story began in a group of friends who met in an apartment where they experimented with drugs. It was just fun and exciting. Taking drugs was attractive, particularly because it was illegal. Drug use has become an ordinary part of his life and his lifestyle. But then he discovered the drug market and its opportunities. And he quit his apprenticeship, he quit his job as a carpenter, and he became what he called a professional drug dealer. This young man stands for many young people in our sample who reported about the seduction of the drug market as an alternative to an ordinary life of apprenticeship and employment. He spoke about the massive amount of money he could make from drug dealing in a short period of time. The seduction to make a profit of up to €1,000 a night in quick deals at the nightclub was enormous, he said. And after some time, he professionalized his activities even more. He organized his sources, very often in the darknet, and he developed a customer base. We could now interpret this as a form of ordinary economic activity and as self-employment on an alternative market, although a criminal market. It is the same capitalist economic principle that resembles the work of, let's say, an ordinary car dealer with similar rules of supply and demand. At least, this is the way some of our interviewees saw it. They accumulate wealth, they have success, which often compensates for their school failure. And this economic success also shapes their character. It builds self-confidence, it provides a person with prestige and power. A second cultural feature of these deviant subcultures is their inclination to experimenting with substances as a form of thrill-seeking. We identified a group of youngsters that may be difficult to treat with conventional methods. Juveniles who persistently deny having a drug problem and who pretend to be able to control their drug consumption at any time, if they only wanted to. They usually do not feel any strain for therapy. They certainly do not feel physically dependent on drugs, but drug use has become a social routine. In their view, the troubles start when they get caught by the police, either for drug dealing or for other offenses. Before that, smoking marijuana and occasional trips on synthetic drugs were part of their lifestyle, their subculture. They are usually not aware of the way their behavioral patterns changed and how the use of drugs obstructs, for instance, opportunities for education and vocational training, family relationships, or sports activities. Experimenting with drugs and engaging in deviant behavior are experienced as fun, exciting, and status-generating. Hanging out together is often considered as freedom from institutions of social control, such as the family or school. Together with easy access to synthetic drugs in subcultures of nighttime economies, this mindset of thrill-seeking presents a fertile ground for persistent and increasing drug use. This finding supports our preference of the motivational concept of edge work as deliberative risk-taking over all the arguments of lacking self-control. Gottfrieds and Hershey, for example, argued that low self-control is the cause for criminal propensity to developed in early childhood. Others, like Wilson and Kelling, whose work is associated with the theory of right realism, they argued that the opportunity makes the thief, as it were. But in contrast to these approaches, Stephen Ling presents the idea of edge work as a skilled performance in risk-taking and exploring the edges of everyday life. Engaging in behavior that pushes the behavioral boundaries in a dangerous, possibly life-threatening way. And I quote from his work, "Edge workers claim to possess a special ability, one that transcends activity-specific skills. This unique skill, which applies to all types of edge work, is the ability to maintain control over a situation that verges on complete chaos, a situation most people would regard as entirely uncontrollable." End of quote. The motivation to drug use is then interpreted by the desire to escape the institutional order of contemporary life and the search for fun and excitement. The seduction of drug use may even be interpreted as a desire for deviancy. The picture painted by edgework theory is very different from those in social control theory or in right realism, and we believe it's much more suitable to our clients and clientele. This change in perspective from control theory or opportunity reduction to edgework theory may fundamentally change also concepts in prevention. The challenge for any form of work in drug prevention then is to show young people how other ways of gaining power and status in the group of peers. Very often that would entail a radical break with peers and even moving to another community to start a new episode in life. However, I've just talked about the drug culture, so the culture of the young people, of the clients that we interviewed, but I also want to look at the other side, the judicial culture or the political culture of drugs, of drug prevention maybe. So however, this drug culture is also a reaction to particular judicial culture, or the nature and extent of criminalization of drugs, that is, which drugs are considered illegal and legal, which drugs may be prescribed medically, what repertoire of sanctions is chosen, and how are regulations enforced. The degree of criminalization has direct effects and indirect effects on the drug cultures that I was talking about. Direct effects of criminalization foster the development of a retreatist subculture. The problem is that underground drug users, like my first example that I presented, rarely make use of prevention services. Secondly, criminalization may lead to high-risk consumption patterns when no information on chemical purity or the composition of substances is available. Other consequences include misery and marginalization of socially deprived people. Finally, we know that prosecution is the main driver of prices of drugs. So judicial cultures also shape the drug cultures indirectly, as they limit the scope of alternative drug controls and services. For example, therapy instead of punishment, which allows to escape repression and further stigmatization. The provision of drugs defined as substitutes by the state health insurance and admission to substitution programs. Harm reduction by pill testing services in Austria, for example. Syringe exchange programs at prisons, health rooms for safe drug consumption, and shelters and public meeting places or meeting points free of police control. Finally, the impact of judicial cultures on drug cultures may be observed also in the public discourse and the definition of drug problems in the media. How are drugs discussed in public? What threats are attributed to drug use in public? The media is a very strong political power, we know, as the basis for the development of drug cultures in our societies. In short, we can conclude all activities in regard to drugs are culturally determined. Who consumes drugs, how often, at what occasion, with what intention, and in which social context depends on the cultural structures of the social and political environment. And I think this analytical sensitivity is what programs in prevention should also take into account. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow. So, those two presentations link very nicely together, so perhaps you'd like to come up, and I don't know if other members of your team also want to join you in answering the questions. You can call upon them if need be. One of the points that strikes me, which I don't know, I find it quite hard to make a connection between the discussions we've had which have talked about trauma and the problems that individuals have faced, and then discussions which talk about the context. How does one connect the two types of approaches, from looking at in terms of moving towards some practical advice? I'm not quite sure what lessons are drawn from your analyses for practitioners. Some of the behaviours you talk about seem very rational. They seem like rational responses to the situation, rather than trauma-informed. So I'm not sure what the practical implications are of the analysis.
Well, my answer would be that whatever we do in drug microphone?
It is
green.
It's
green.
green.
It's green.
Yeah. I think that one of the conclusions for our prevention programs is that they have to be multidisciplinary. In all our institutions that we have worked with in Austria, there has been a multitude of professional expertise and also of professional work. So medical treatment was connected to educational possibilities, and also to simply to give young people in an inpatient care home, to give them a structure in everyday life, to help them get up in the morning on a regular basis, have breakfast with others, and to guide them into a regular daily procedure. And I think this should not be underestimated with all this emphasis on medical treatment. This help in social life to become a routine that may abstain from the focus on drugs. I think that's a very important outcome for us in our interviews that we did.
If I may add something to that, I think the situation in most European countries is that easy choices for practitioners is to focus on drugs and to focus on security, while people who are being served need something else, more holistic approach. And on the one hand, you may appeal to practitioners, try to be as holistic as possible in a given context, but also to policymakers and to legislators to change, to make holistic choices, easy choices, to paraphrase the famous health promotion message.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. My name is Axel Klein, and I help Blaine in the editing of Drugs and Alcohol today. I also wanted to follow on from Susanne's question of practical implications to ask about the policy implications from the presentation. Particularly the second one now. From what I understand, one of your informants was using a number of drugs for very understandable medical reasons, as you call self-medications, to deal with the stress and stresses of living underground. And that would therefore suggest that we should really move towards integrating these substances in our pharmacopoeia as proper medications for dealing with anxiety, which would imply some kind of regulatory legalization approach. But if we go that route, that would also deprive him, I presume it's a him, of his livelihood, because drug dealing seems to be the one area where people who are living these underground lives find an occupation where they have an advantage. So the very route we take in order to spare them the health problems that they suffer, especially mental health problems, would also deprive them of the livelihood they can gain. And with that dilemma, I would like to hear your slides. Thank you.
Well, yes, it is a dilemma. On the one hand, we have the responsibility to do the best for a person, and we see from our experience, we can already see that that person is drifting into a dilemma even more. So do we intervene, or do we grant him his freedom to use substances, whatever he wants? I think this is the political debate between more of a liberal view that everyone has the right to harm himself or herself.
But he's not harming himself, he's medicating himself.
Well,
he's being harmed by his context, by his situation. He's harming him. And he's medicated.
yes, but that needs to be controlled, and I think that's the help. Why it needs to be controlled?
And by who?
Sorry?
And by who?
And by whom? By all those professionals that take responsibility to help this person.
That's a particular culture, I suppose.
What do you others think?
I have nothing to add, I think.
Thanks a lot, Jacek and Günter, for these very informative presentations. My name is Heinz Stöber from Germany, in Frankfurt. And I really liked the data collection from Jacek, and we find throughout Europe the scaling up of criminalization everywhere. From my country, we've got last year 350,000 drug cases, and 80% of them for possession of small quantities for personal use. And mostly the age groups you named as well for Germany. So it's ridiculous. We are criminalizing young people for personal usage of a substance they like, and they would take in their own, let's say, responsibility once they got to know. What we make out of it, and I think we should consider that for the final statement of the project as well, is that we consider drug policy as a strategy of harm production, where we set harm production, where we set against, of course, strategies of harm reduction. But the fact is that, and Jacek only touched this, we can explore that in many more slides and in many more reports, where Jacek touched all the negative health, social, personal, individual, and system consequences of this harm production strategy. So I think if we take away this barrier and if we take away this context, we could work with personal problems of drug taking or risk taking in general much better. Mostly our social work are mostly dealing with the effects of harm production and not with the effects of let's say, drug, misled drug taking.
Yeah, we made preliminary estimations and we calculated that every year close to 1 million young Europeans are affected by criminal justice system.
Jacek, a little bit louder.
We made estimations that how many young people across EU are affected by current drug policies, and I agree with you that might be approaching 1 million if Germany has like 300,000. And it is not just 1 year, it is cumulative. Some people are like in the revolving door, but there are new people. And it's not only the individual harm, but the relationship, the attitude towards the state as an oppressive agent. It is something which may have long-lasting political consequences. For not trusting, not being confident with your state, which oppresses you for reasons apparently not that important. So it's not only a question of individual harm and not only harm in the area of drugs, but it may shape relationship between young generations and contemporary states across Europe. And it might be stressed.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your presentation, very thought-provoking. My name is Mike Lynch, and my question comes from a policing background as such. Whilst this is a complex problem, and as the treatment and harm reduction process goes forward, have you got any advice or guidance as to how traditional policing would engage with this process? Because, of course, not only are we trying to deal with their complex drug addiction, but the associated problems that go along with it, which may be violence in a public place, which may be domestic violence in the home, which may be safeguarding issues if they have young family members. All of these things have a danger of derailing the process whilst we're trying to treat that individual or support that individual. So I was just wondering what thoughts you may have on that complex problem.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very important question, and I can say that I can refer to another research project that I'm leading in an EU project now that looks at a common training for social workers and police officers. So we try to get the two professions together and to talk about their work. And we have already run our first pilot training in different countries in Europe. And we can say that this is so important that one profession explains where they come from, where they how they tick, so to speak, what their tasks are, either also from the legal side. The police acts very often on a legal mandate. They must arrest a person, or at least take the personalities of a person when they come across substance abuse. They must act, and that is important to explain to the social workers. The social workers don't understand that. And the other way around. Also the police officers very often do not understand how social workers act. And I think this is one of the major issues that we try to get those professions together into an exchange. But we don't only want to stop there. We also want to talk about particular problems like drug use and drug use in public places. So if, for instance, we have a drug testing bus run by social workers placed in front of a nightclub where young people can go and have their drugs tested anonymously, then of course the police should stay away and should not hide behind the corner. So this kind of agreement, a common policy between those different institutions, I think that's very important. And that's only two professions, and I think we can probably include other professions like the public transport system and private securities and so on. But I think that's a very important thing.
Yeah, to continue what Günter said, some time ago we had a community action project on drug prevention, and we applied these multidisciplinary trainings involving all important stakeholders, including the police, teachers, social workers, but also representatives of NGOs. And the added value of this training is enormous. First of all, they start to speak the same language, to use the same language. It facilitates communication and prevents misunderstandings. But also, in the practical action at the community level, the vertical relationships between institutions become horizontal. If you met a policeman as a teacher in the training, then instead of calling the headmaster of the school, who calls the headmaster of the police station, who calls John the policeman to come, you just call your friend from the training, John policeman, he comes if need be. So this is something I realize quite practical that may come out from this discussion.
And to include the community, that's also important, to have representatives of minorities, of the civil society, and also to give them a word. But that's a big challenge, you know, to get these different groups together, because there is also very often prejudice between these different groups.
I think this morning Betsy said at the beginning that one of the problems of organising this kind of cross-national and multidisciplinary project was to agree on a common language to start with, and she also noted the problems of getting joined up policy, which have been with us for as long as we've been alive, and these seem to be issues that have been raised in this session, with possibly a solution being, as Betsy indicated, that to look at the local level may be one area where this kind of holistic and joined up, inclusive approach may be developed, and so we may hear a bit more about that after lunch. But before lunch, our colleague from Public Health England would like to say a few words.
Just move to the front. I'm not hijacking this conference, because I do actually have my own conference later on in the year, but I just wanted to kind of let you know, because I've had a few questions about it today. So I mentioned WEFREN 2020 earlier on, and so I just wanted to make sure people were aware of the event. I'm sorry, I've not come very well prepared, so usually we have leaflets and a banner, but there's a small thing of coronavirus going around that we've been dealing with at the moment, so I haven't managed to pull myself together. However, what I wanted to say was that all the issues that we've been talking about today, you know, thinking about some of the methodological issues, how we translate policy and practice and bring those two spheres together, and also this afternoon we're going to be talking about how we work across jurisdictions and translate some of the work into different countries. WEFREN is trying to achieve all of this. And I just wondered, as a show of hands, obviously you're interested in research in the justice system, and obviously you're all internationalists, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But how many of you are registered WEFREN members? Apart from the people on the steering committee, I know. No. Okay. So, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think the internet is working at the moment, but otherwise, I would encourage you all to go on to www.wefren.org. So that's WEPHREN. It's a collaborative forum that's run through PHE with the WHO Europe Health in Prisons programme, and looks to bring people together around research and capacity development for prison health, but also looking at health across the justice system. And we're holding our first conference in October, and we're joining up with our WHO colleagues with an annual conference that they already do around health in prisons, so I support the development of that. So from the 19th to the 21st of October in London, there's going to be this international event that's free to attend. So the 19th and half of the 20th will be the WHO HIP meeting, and then the afternoon of the 20th and all day on the 21st of October will be the WEFREN 2020 conference. So you can go on the website, you'll have this lovely video of Eamon O'More, who's a guy that I work with and director of the UK Collaborating Centre for the WHO-HIP, doing a little invitation. And then at the bottom of this page you can go on to the registration website, which also has the abstract submission process on there as well. We're closing abstract submissions on the 31st of March. Betsy's already said that she's going to do something. I'd encourage the rest of you to think about what you might be able to put in, and then the scientific committee will be meeting to review the abstracts, and we'll get in touch with people shortly. But it's a free conference. You know, you get 3 days in London. You can spend your other 2 doing some sightseeing, perhaps, if you're not interested so much in the conference. But it's a really good opportunity to showcase the work that you're doing, to meet other collaborators, and to think about how you might be able to work globally. We've got a real interest in making sure that people with lived experience are part of our conference. So we have a subgroup of our abstract review panel that is by people in prison. We will have people who have lived experience of prison coming to the conference, talking about how research has affected and impacted their lives, how they're involved in research, and also thinking about how, as researchers, we can involve people with lived experience more in the process as well, for them to have a voice that can be heard by policymakers. Thank you, and sorry for hijacking a few minutes before that.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers from this morning's session who've really given us so much to think about. So over lunch you can expand on these thoughts, and please return promptly at 28 minutes past 1 so that we can start at 1:30. Thank you.
Susanne, Sergeant Jarrett's resigned. Sergeant Jarrett's resigned. So they're in the middle of a reshuffle when he resigned. Sorry, they told him apparently to sack his team, his aides. So it's Dominic Cummins behind the scenes. So
wow, how exciting!
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Because I thought he was managing to keep them together, but
Completely unraveling.
wow.
Karen, did you read that Sergeant Jarrett